Alexander Clarke is a qualified philosophy and ethics teacher who predominantly explores Daoist, Buddhist, and absurdist concepts through his work. Influenced by correlational thinking, he uses imagery and dialogue to investigate the interplay between the subjects such as you and I. He is also the founder of Coffee and Alex, as well as a writer of educational short stories for a company based in China. Aging range from 6 to 16. The characters are pre-made with habits, personality traits, etc. Then he adds the existing universe. He has written poems, interviews, short stories, articles, and blog content, with pieces being published in The Art Touches Art, Tutor Hunt, Round Lemon, Soul Lit, and Vocal. He also now has a podcast where he interviews artists and reads his writing. Over to you, Alex.
Hello. Okay, so I'm Alex. Here you can see my logo for Coffee and Alex, which is excellent. And below you can see me at university, which was a good time. That was 3 years ago in my little room. Okay, so moving on. Who is Alex and what is Coffee and Alex? Well, I am Alex. We have already covered this though. So I've got an MA in Theology and Religious Studies from the University of Glasgow. And I've got a post-compulsory PGCE from UCL, which I kind of did last year during COVID, which leads me to my second point, which is schools weren't doing school things, so I made Coffee and Alex. But so we believe in learner-led education and person-centered writing, and we have a podcast where I talk to artists and read my own writing. So I'm published in Art Touches Art, Soul Lit, Vocal, Tutor Hunt, Round Lemon, and a company in China. So I've just been moved on to sci-fi stories for them. So before I was doing like kids stories, which was 6 to 16. And yeah, that was pretty good and I learned a lot. But now I'm doing 6 to 12 to 19. So it's a little bit more talking about like drugs and religious contentions and politics. So it's a little bit more interesting. I only started that last week though. So yeah, I teach freelance for an online company called Bling ABC, and I take private bookings as well. And I'm trying to make prints and sell them, and I'm making those prints collaboratively because I'm a writer. I don't do visual things. So yeah, that's pretty much it. This is a slide just going into a little bit more about what I do. I mean, by learner-led education, I mean that learners should be able to choose what they do, how they do it, and follow their own intrinsic motivation, which basically means that everybody within themselves kind of has a feeling of what they want to do, or I believe that anyway, or at the very least has an understanding of what they're good at and what they're bad at. And I think people should be able to follow that without being put into a classroom setting and kind of made to do this and that, or jump high or go low. So that's what I'm kind of trying to work towards. For person-centered writing, I mean that characters, that writing should be focused on characters more than plot. So if you're going, obviously a story needs a plot, but I think the plot should stem from what the characters are like, rather than forcing a plot on the characters. And that kind of makes it a bit more natural as you go on. But I'll talk about this a bit more later. And yeah, so my main influences, Taoism, Buddhism, absurdism, and correlational thinking. So what is Taoism? A very good question. Well, you can see this guy standing on a mountain looking a bit lost. Taoism is a very difficult thing to talk about, largely because of this lost man, because nobody knows when Taoism started. We know that Taoism started with people walking off into mountains like this guy and kind of just standing there for a while and trying to stay by themselves and get a feeling of the universe and the cosmos and whatnot. And there's nothing really written about this time. So this is first era Taoism. This guy to the left, who I'm sure we can all agree is dressed pretty fantastically. I love his beard, his robe, everything about him really. That's Lei Zhu. And he supposedly wrote the Daodejing, which we can date to 450 BCE. And that's a bit more poetic. We'll have a look at some excerpts in a bit. And then there's the Zhuangzi, which is more prose imagery. Sorry, just to pause for a bit. I forgot to say, with this talk, I'm going to explain my influences first, and then I'm going to look at my writing after that, because it makes a little bit more sense. You'll be able to understand what I'm talking about a bit more at that point. So yeah, the Zhuangzi was written a little bit later. The Tao is kind of think like Star Wars and the Force. I'm pretty sure that's what Star Wars was based off of, George Lucas. The Tao is like a pervading energy that kind of like joins all things together. It's ineffable, it's interconnected. And this is why people were going off into the mountain, because they thought, maybe I can get a feeling of this weird energy and go off and do things. But largely it talks about intuition. And if you're good at intuition and you're good at thinking, this is what I'm supposed to be doing right now, that is kind of following the Tao, so to speak. And then there's D. D is just the Tao kind of coming into physical things like tables, chairs, people. But again, we'll look at that a bit more in a bit. So we have this called Wu Wei, which is a great term. I love the word. Wu Wei means non-action, or acting with the Tao, acting as your authentic self, effortless action. But non-action is kind of a bad translation, but with Wu Wei, you would kind of be doing things by not doing things, as in choosing not to do something is a choice, if that makes sense. So then we have the 5 phases philosophy. This is quite interesting. This talks about how the universe is always in constant change, that things are changing all around us all the time, that we're changing, the universe is changing, planets are changing, everything's changing, and you can't stop this change. Correlational thinking. So I said that this is one of my main influences. Correlational thinking is kind of thinking how things don't oppose each other, but relate to each other. I'll be able to give a few more concrete examples of that in a bit. Spontaneity, like I said, this kind of links with Wu Wei, but that's kind of this burst of like intuition or a feeling that, oh, this would be good to do now. And that's quite important in Taoism as well. And then we have unlearning and the uncarved block. The idea of this being a wooden block can become a spoon, but a spoon can't become a wooden block. So the idea of that is you should allow yourself mentally to be open to all possibilities and to attempt all things and to try all things and not to be closed off to things. So, you know, you remain as the uncarved block, which is fantastically mystical. So here are some examples of the Daodejing. Like I said, it's a bit poetic. If you look at the middle one, when I was talking about correlational thinking, so true words are beautiful, beautiful words are not true. I think that's great. But this is kind of what I'm talking about, that things kind of relate with each other in a way that they aren't necessarily supposed to. If we look at the one on the left, the far one on the left, so where is it? So heaven and earth are everlasting. The reason heaven and earth can last forever is that they do not exist for themselves. So again, it's saying that these things can permeate forever because they're not interested in themselves. So it's kind of this opposite ideas, these opposite themes, which they are saying actually correlate and make sense, if that makes sense. And then we have this last one here. I'm not sure, I might be able to move everybody to the left. Here we go. While alive, the body is soft and pliant. When dead, it is hard and rigid. All living things, grass and trees, while alive, are soft and supple. When dead, become dry and brittle. And this is kind of saying that you should essentially go with the flow, so to speak. You shouldn't try to force ideas or concepts on other people. You should let people be people and let them breathe. A big thing with Taoism is in politics is ruling a country is like cooking a small fish. Too much poking spoils the meat. So the idea is people should just be left alone to kind of do whatever they want to do. And yeah, I think this has been quite influential on me. And I think it makes more sense, essentially, than a lot of stuff you come across typically in the West. The Zhuangzi. Oh, sorry, just to go back quickly. Lei Zhu means old masters. So he wasn't a real guy. It's a collection of other things put together. Zhuangzi was. So we're pretty sure Zhuangzi was a real guy. And he writes about prose, writes in prose. The book that he writes is, what am I trying to say? It's written in prose, but it's written in a really abstract kind of way. If you look at the left one here, so in the northern darkness, there is a fish and his name is Kun. The Kun is so huge, I don't know how many thousand li he measures. He changes and becomes a bird whose name is Peng. The back of the Peng measures, I don't know how many thousand li across, and when it rises, it flies off. His rings are like clouds over the sky. So the main thing here is that you start off with a massive fish, which turns into a massive bird, which turns into a massive cloud. And the idea is that the Tao is kind of obviously always changing and forming into other things. But with my writing later, mixed with absurdism and stuff like this, this is quite a big influence of me, this idea of things kind of forming into other things kind of effortlessly, which I think is quite interesting. This middle bit here, this is about beginner's mind, which we talked about with the uncarved block. So it talks about the benefits of being a baby. Not many people talk about the benefits of being a baby these days. So can you be a baby? The baby acts without knowing what it is doing, moves without knowing where it is going. Its body is like the limb of a withered tree. Its mind is like dead ashes. Since it is so, no bad fortune will ever touch it, and no good fortune would ever come to it either. And again, it's kind of this idea of you putting your opinions on the world rather than accepting the world how it is. It's easy to say, it's not always like that. But again, I think it's almost an early form of liberalism. You should just let people do whatever they want to do, and you shouldn't put your opinions upon them. And then here, this far right bit. Now, this is the bit which I really take from Daoism. I'm going to read it. So when the monkey trainer was handing out acorns, he said, "You get 3 in the morning and 4 at night." This made all the monkeys furious. "Well then," he said, "you get 4 in the morning and 3 at night." The monkeys are all delighted. There was no change in the reality behind the words, and yet the monkeys responded with joy and anger. The point being, if you make a decision, it can seem really important. Maybe we should turn left, maybe we should turn right. But ultimately, the decision you make is good for some things, bad for other things. And going further than that, what is good and what is bad? Things just change into other things. There isn't even a good choice or a right choice. You're just stuck in your own human thinking. There's a lot of different ways to interpret that, but I think the monkey trainer thing is quite interesting. And here, I won't spend too much on this because I've gone a little bit over how long I planned to already, but this is the construct of yin and yang. So I talked about the 5 changes cycle, and this is actually the first binary code. And the guy who invented the binary code saw this and said, this was the first binary code. Not exactly, but you've got a 0 and a 1. You have 2 inputs. And the idea is by layering 2 elements on top of each other over and over again, you get more complex elements. Yin and yang aren't opposed, by the way. Yin is always turning into yang, and yang is always turning into yin. You get some people who say it's good and bad, or order and chaos, but that's not quite true. The point is order is always becoming chaos, and chaos is slowly becoming order to the Daoist perspective. And this is the last thing I wanted to show you with Daoism. So the I Ching was written in 1000 BC. Again, it's confusing. This is separate to Daoism, but it's absolutely part of Daoism. And this is a backdrop when Daoism was invented, created, however you want to see it. And like I said, these are different forms of layerings of yin and yang. You have 64 hexagons. And this is actually a way of reading the future as well, which I won't go into quite yet. But the outside circle is time, and the inside square is space. And so what this is meant to represent is that time is always changing, and space is always changing. So everything around us is always essentially changing. There is more complex readings of each individual hexagram. But again, this is ancient stuff. And I think a far more nuanced way of seeing the world than what the West kind of saw a lot later on. I mean, it took us a long time to see the world in a similar way to that. So Buddhism, 6th century, a little bit later. So again, if we go back here, we have the wheel, the cycle, change, things constantly changing. If we go to Buddhism, you can see here with the prayer wheels, it's the same kind of concept. So in Buddhism, everything is impermanent. Everything is impermanent. Everything is always you're always moving into the next moment. You're never here forever. You're always in the next bit. So you're not really here. Interconnectedness. This is important because by this they mean you can't exist by yourself. I can't exist without going to the shop and buying a sandwich. I need the sandwich. Without the sandwich, I will surely perish. So I can't survive just on my own. And because of these two facts, we don't have a soul. We're empty. There's nothing there, which I think is a really interesting idea. Again, very different to the ideas we have in the West. So life is essentially an illusion because we're never the same person for more than a split second. And the way you get out of this is by breaking through by being in the moment as much as possible, by being present and being aware of the continuing change. So you can see there's some overlapping themes there. Altered states of consciousness. By the way, I've put more things which influence me from Buddhism rather than going through the whole thing. So altered states of consciousness, which they get from meditation. There's thousands of different meditations. Meditation predates Buddhism by a long, long, long way. And they try to do lots of different things. But obviously in Buddhism, they want to understand that life is an illusion. We're not really here and we need to escape. The recognition of cycles in our thought and with time. And there's a really interesting thing with therapy, which I'll talk about in a second. But in Indian religions, Hinduism, Buddhism, they tend to see that the universe is, that time is cyclical, that time moves in a cycle. And they believe that the universe has been destroyed and recreated thousands and thousands of times. So they believe in the multiverse theory, and that there are many different universes, but they're stretched by time, not in the same time. So dependent origination, this is the 12-step thinking kind of concept. This is really interesting because this is very early cognitive behavioral kind of ideas, that our thoughts are constantly going in a circle because we can't control desiring or wanting the next thing. They have a bit more of a basic idea, but again, they thought we would be happier if we managed to slow down our thinking to understand why our thoughts are always moving around in a circle and how we can kind of approach it in a better way. And that has had an influence on cognitive behavioral therapy. There are things which have been taken from Buddhism, different tricks to move the mind to different ways, which they've incorporated in CBT. And meditation is recommended as a form of CBT by some people. Not Buddhist meditation intrinsically, but meditation put together by psychotherapists, taking the things they think is useful from Buddhism and putting it into therapy. So quickly, let's have a look at some poetry. So the one on the far left, this is from the Pali Canon, very standard Buddhist poem, which kind of goes through about essentially understanding that the world is all mind and that we need to escape, it. I'm moving a little faster, but the middle one is by the 6th Dalai Lama, who's a really interesting guy because he wasn't very Dalai Lama-y. He went around sleeping and with lots of people and drinking a lot. But there's an argument. Well, he got murdered. He got murdered at 26 because people were fed up with it. They're like, look, you're the Dalai Lama. You can't keep trying to sleep with everybody and drinking lots. This just isn't appropriate. And he didn't really believe that. And the Mongols ended up invading India and they stole him and no one knows what happened. He died. I'll go back to why this might actually be very, very, very Buddhist and why some people think that's very, very, very Buddhist later. But I think you've got some really pretty poems here. My love was lost through theft, time to consult the cards, for that passionate girl roams round within my dreams. So, mate, that's very sad, but it's pretty, and it's actually talking perhaps about Dharma, about the world and about the desire to break free from the illusion, the girl being the ultimate Buddhist ideal, which is to escape. And to split, to go back actually for what I was going to say earlier, I mean, to be in the moment, to be ever present, I mean, love, sex, things like that, that's actually very much perhaps what they're talking about. So this is kind of a different kind of way of looking at Buddhist teachings. My favorite one is the last one. Folk gossip about me. Sorry, yes, I am to blame. A lad's 3 tiptoe steps. Oh, I've reached the brothel. It's like, you know, you're meant to be the Dalai Lama. You can't be going to the brothel. This is a terrible idea. It just makes me laugh. And then the last one, Jack Kerouac, who wrote the Dharma Bums, he was really into Buddhism. And again, what I was talking about with this sex and being in the moment and stuff like that, he kind of moves it on to drugs as well, with heroin, morphine, and things like this. And there's something there about trying to get into altered states to realize the world's an illusion. And my point being is that poetry is very Buddhist, writing about altered states, and reality is very Buddhist. And there's a lot of different takes on it. There's modern takes, ancient takes, and takes in the middle, which, you know, they're all very different. This is great. So this is, again, is cycles, circles, things going around. The outside, this is the Buddhist wheel of life. So the outside circle is the 12-step thinking, which I talked about. So they all have a different one. And the Buddha believed that each one of these steps was fixed. So each step led to the next step. But this kind of basically keeps your mind moving around in a circle. Then in the middle, you have the different realms of the gods. Then going into the further into the middle, you have this black bit here, which is bad karma, and this white bit here, which is good karma. And then you have these 3 key sins in the middle, which keep the world turning, which is like ignorance and 2 things which escape me at the moment. And this guy here, eating the wheel, the big guy at the top, his Yama, which is like the god of impermanence. So his always is eating the wheel itself. Everything will be destroyed and remade again. But my big influence on this is basically circles, cycles, time, things revolving, you know, in thoughts and life and everything, things constantly changing. A mandala, I won't go into this too much. This is super esoteric, but they basically try to visualize this in their minds. These guys are making this from memory. They remembered how this looked, and they just made this from memory, which is insane if you think about it. And they meditate on this and try to become other things and think about it. It's mad stuff, and there's loads of different ones. But this is Tibetan Buddhism. It's pretty interesting stuff. So now on to absurdism. We're nearly to the writing. So absurdism shares a lot of similarities with Taoism and Buddhism. Anyway, there are many absurdist philosophers and definitions of absurdism. I picked this one in the middle because it was easy to find and easy to understand. A philosophy based on the belief that the universe is irrational and meaningless, and that the search for order brings the individual into conflict with the universe. And basically, when in like the 18th century, when the Europeans were like, God is dead, God is definitely dead, you had these 3 kind of philosophies that came from it: nihilism, existentialism, and absurdism. And a big difference between absurdism than existentialism and nihilism is that they believe we don't really have free will because we're trapped in this absurd world. Existentialism believes we do have free will, and that because God is dead, it's liberating and we can make a choice. Nihilism is just like, well, you might as well shoot yourself in the head, although it is a little bit more complex than that. But absurdism is a little different. And this picture, Odilon Redon, the egg, I really like his stuff. It's good. He wasn't an absurdist, he was a mystical symbolist, but it's quite an absurd picture. Egg with eyes. So yeah, the Christian God is dead. We all die. We're already dead, basically, so there's not much point in doing anything, is where absurdists start off. We are trapped by constant thoughts, judgments, predictions, self-commentaries. There is no inherent meaning. The world is transient and painful. So again, you can see there's actually a lot of similarities here between Taoism and Buddhism. This is an absurd existence, and we are absurd creatures. But recognizing the mundane everyday kind of stuff as absurd can set our minds free. And by embracing ourselves as absurd leads us to embracing our authentic selves overall. And you've got a nice picture here on the left of the Buddha by the same guy, Odlon Redon. So the myth of Sisyphus, okay, I'm going to try to get this all in 3 and 4 minutes. The myth of Sisyphus, I'm sure you may have heard of it by Albert Camus. This is a big absurd text. And he talks about essentially how, I mean, Sisyphus, in the Greek myth, Sisyphus gets punished by Zeus because he goes around murdering people. And to be fair, that's a pretty good reason to be punished. You shouldn't really go around murdering people. But Sisyphus felt like this wasn't really very fair. And he was stuck on a mountain, rolling a boulder up a hill every day. And that's just what he does. Apparently, he's still doing it now. He's just rolling a boulder up a hill. And Albert Camus compares this to us. He says that, you know, we're constantly, let's say that take this artist talk or your guys' artist talks or whoever's here, whatever, you know, you could spend a lot of the day thinking, how am I going to do the artist talk? I hope it goes well. What's going to happen when I turn up? I don't know. And that takes a lot more time than the actual talk itself. And we do this for everything. We do this for everything we ever do. And so we're trapped rolling this mental rock up a hill all the time. The absurd, there's a good quote here. It is a matter of living in that state of the absurd. I know on what it is founded. This mind and this world straining against each other without being able to embrace each other. What he means by that is, you know, we are, like we said, skipping to the conclusion, absurd creatures. And we're in this world that doesn't quite fit us right. And there's this contention there. And because of that, we're in this state of absurdity because, you know, we're trying to fit in with all this neuroticism and we're stuck in this world which doesn't really embrace that. And you have to be something else. And so everything's absurd. And he talks about beauty briefly, and beauty being something that can kind of help you transcend out of this, like we talked with like the 6th Dalai Lama. But he says ultimately that everything ceases to exist and it's stripped from you anyway. So that's not really a way out. And here's the guy, he's rolling up the boulder up the hill. But this is the last thing I'm going to read. So, but Sisyphus teaches the higher fidelity that negates the gods and raises the rocks. He too concludes that all is well. The universe henceforth without a master seems to him neither sterile or futile. Each atom of that stone, each mineral flake of that night-filled mountain in itself forms a world. The struggle itself toward the heights is enough to fill a man's heart. One must imagine Sisyphus happy. So he's saying that despite all of that, which this separates itself from nihilism completely, that you should be happy. You should embrace the absurd. You should embrace the everyday as crazy and enjoy it. And it doesn't matter. But he does write a lot of pages to come to that conclusion. So you do think, okay, what was really the point? But moving on, this I said this is the last thing I was going to read. That's a slight lie. This is the last thing I'm going to read. Notes on the Underground Man by Dostoevsky, which is a brilliant, brilliant book. It's a short book. And he basically, it's written from the standpoint of a guy who is highly neurotic. You can't trust him. He's a civil servant in his 40s, and he's just angry. This bit here, for instance, I am a sick man. I am a spiteful man. I am an unattractive man. I believe my liver is diseased. However, I know nothing at all about my disease and do not know for certain what ails me. And he refuses to consult the doctor. And he says, my liver is bad. Well, let it get worse. But similar to Albert Camus, he thinks, I mean, he uses a novel form to kind of express this, but he says that it's the hatred, the spite, the things that don't really help us along our journey to do well, that prove that we're not just machines, that we're something a bit more than that. And, you know, that's a good thing, theoretically. And the underground is like our neuroticism. It's a symbol for our neuroticism. I like this middle bit here. We are discussing things seriously, but if you won't deign to give me your attention, I will drop your acquaintance. I can retreat into my underground hole. So you can always retreat into your neuroticism and run away from everybody else if you don't like them. So, and this is the last quote, which is a happy quote again. I agree that 2 times 2 is 4 is an excellent little thing. But if we're going to start praising everything, then 2 times 2 is 5 is sometimes also a most charming little thing. And I'm going to skip these for now because I want to look at the writing, which is about on time, which is good. So what do I write about? That's a good question. So the things that influence me from this is intuitive feels. So you kind of discover how to write as yourself through practicing. And I think this is very similar to visual artists as well, from people I've talked about and sculptors and stuff, that, you know, you can learn how to do and how to make, but you've got to learn how to do it yourself and with your own flair and make it yours. And I think that's an intuitive kind of field, an intuitive kind of process, going back to all those guys on the mountain thousands of years ago. Breaking from routine through the absurd, or recognizing the mundane as absurd. So I have a lot of themes in my writing where it's just a bit weird, a little bit odd, and but there's a point to it. There's something being explored despite that, and that's kind of my influence from absurdism quite a lot. Everything is transient, so everything is kind of passing, changing, as we discussed. But other than themes like love, beauty, respect, I can't think of any others right now, but I think themes kind of go on through generations, which is why you have novels 1,000 years ago, which are still read, because it's still relatable because of how we feel about stuff, and, you know, how we kind of engage with the world. So although we will die, the way we feel about things doesn't quite die. Poetry and dialogue to explore concepts. Going back to the Daoism books we looked at and the Buddhist books we looked at, a lot of those things are often written in dialogues between somebody who doesn't know much and somebody who does know a lot. And the guy's kind of teasing the stupid guy a bit about, this is how you know things. So that's something I've taken. And the poetry as well. I mean, I write poetry sometimes too. But yeah, to kind of try and use words to sometimes fill the gaps about the themes, which you can't quite put into words. Maybe I do that a lot. I think I do that sometimes. Interconnections. So you and I, are we the same person? Which sounds wonderfully hippie, but you know, the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we all have the same needs. And I think that our wants stem from those needs. So even if you have, even if you look at 2 people who are completely different from each other, they're still trying to fulfill the same basic thing. You know, either self-respect or getting food, or, you know, so I think I truly believe that everybody is much more similar than they are different. And the last thing is cycles. So you have behavior. So abuse is a big one. Abuse is one of those things that it happens in cycles. It's never constant. Otherwise, people wouldn't stay with a terrible partner for very long. But also in general, like habitually, you'll have habits. Habits move in cycles. There's a lot of things like that generally we just move in circles, through our thoughts. Nature, I put frogs. I've never written about a frog, but you see what I mean. Nature moves in cycles as well. There's apart from evolution, because then things die and change and move into other things, but there's still kind of a cycle there. Of time, I don't know whether I believe there's many universes stretched out between time, but I find the concept really interesting, and I find the idea of time being cyclical interesting. And I think in a sense that we talked about people's behaviors being similar, that because of that, history repeats. I mean, that's a lazy thing to say in a way, but it is true. I mean, people get angry about the same stuff and then do the same things, and then history kind of goes around in circles. So I think there's something to it. There's something there as well. So moving on, my writing. So I showed this poem to somebody when I was in Greece. I was in Greece recently. It was a lot of fun. And they thought that this poem was to do with trauma. And I see why they thought that, but I don't think that. There is a little bit in there, but I think it's more trying to explore, as I said, different types of mind, playing on the word mind, and then trying to explore if there is a standard way of thinking, a standard mind, like you said, like if you're you or not. So contorted, I sleep, free, I dream. That's a little bit of playing on, like we said, with the Daoist thing of correlational thinking, of contorted and free, if there's actually a link there. Correlational streams, kind of sat that in to say. Deep in Lethe, Lethe is a river in ancient Greece mythology where they think that if you get dipped in it, you forget everything. And that's a whole different ramble, but that's why that's there. And then I put never mind, because that's kind of a middle finger at myself for writing that line, deep in Lethe it was reported, because it's like, oh, look at you, didn't somebody go to university? And then like the never mind's a little cutting, like, you know, but also it's kind of saying about, was there never a mind to begin with? So then I have this trauma line. But like I said, I mean, a lot of CBD is taken from Buddhist concepts. I don't think that trauma is the same as the Tao, but what I do think is that a lot of things that therapists talk about have been discussed before in ways which people don't actually necessarily think about. You know, the idea of the mind being moving in a cycle, and that you need to be aware of that, is an ancient concept. And there's only really something that modern day science is kind of wrestling with today. I mean, we understand it, but to say something is trauma, yeah, people get traumatized. Trauma is an awful thing and people carry it about, but it doesn't mean that you can't fix yourself, and it doesn't mean that you have to be labeled as traumatized. So learned behavior with a cyclical flavor. Yeah, you know, again, moving in circles, and you learn your behavior, but you can become aware of the learned behavior. That my petition now, being aware of the now, the moment, the now, and breaking free from it. It doesn't have to be this big meditation thing. You just have to be aware of what you're actually doing right now and thinking, okay, I'm going to go buy a healthy snack. I say this literally, these things are very difficult, but you know, you can break free from these things. The bacon asked me, is it love? I said, no, bad timing. Piling in the morning over a bad drawing of a cat. I never had your mind. And that's an interesting, because when you date, or if you have a friend or any relationship, human relationship you have, you don't really know how that person perceives you. You know how you perceive them. But you know, again, we take a lot of things for granted, I think, and there's someone observing you, you're observing them. Who's got the right picture? Do neither of you? Are you both kind of just walking through in two separate minds, not knowing what the reality is? So, you know, we've got, well, there was never mind to begin with. I never had a mind because there's learned behavior. So I'm a construction of all the things from childhood and high school and university, everything that's gone before. I'm not actually myself. Is there even a self? And then the people that you observe, who observe you, are, you know, there's different minds there as well. And I quite like, just for technique wise, that cat bit there. Of just like a kind of a punch, like a doof, breaking the rhythm going. But you can't keep doing it. But I quite like, it's something I do quite a lot. For instance, this is my favorite line. I'm a teacher now, cunt. I think it's a great punch. And you know, swearing, putting the odd swear word in, not overdoing them, it kind of keeps its punch. But again, this is the point of saying, well, do you do things for you, or do you do things for how you want people to see you? Trapped I walk, rigid I die, the correlational bit again. Label thoughts lacking permission. That's a technique in meditation, noting, which is used in CBD a bit as well, being aware of predictions, judgments, things like this. And you label them enough and you kind of get an idea of how your thinking works. Moving on quickly, green magpies. So this is, I'm going to keep talking for about 4 or 5 minutes, I think, and then call it for questions and stuff. So this is my absurdist bit. So no, David, look, you're not getting the importance of this. Look, the penguins, right? The penguins fuck each other, but not just when they're alive. No, in the cold, blistering, terrible, unforgiving cold, penguins die. And to stay warm, they fuck the dead ones. Necrophilic penguin orgies. Never see that on nature documentaries, do you? Banality, David. Banality is found in the prescription of truth found by people who think that there's a nice, pretty little order to things. There isn't anything bland about necrophilic penguin orgies. That's one of the reasons, that's one of the things that makes it so evil. And it is true. penguins do have necrophilic penguin orgies, not all penguins, and you never hear about it. And it's I don't know, it is what it is. But people, again, it's kind of talking about this idea that everything's not in an order, everything is chaotic. And also, though, it's kind of hilarious in a dark, horrendous way. And by recognizing it as hilarious, you can kind of break free instead of being all stern, thinking, well, this is the proper thing to do next, which is what David is as a character. And Steve is my Buddhist guru or whoever. And, you know, it's kind of my modern take of him trying to say, oh, no, this is the correct way to look at things. And him saying, no, it's not. And that was my little bit at the pub. So that was where that influence came from. And when I write, just to talk about technique a bit, I tend to look at a page and I put down ideas of little things that want to happen, perhaps even like 3 words, 2 words, and then I start building on the ideas. So rather than to kind of come up with a plot and to think about what I'm going to write, I come up with just good ideas, what I think are good ideas, and then I try to wrap them all together to try to keep the whole thing to read engaging. Nameless. So I think I've pretty much covered that earlier of why I'd write about that. The 2 link, it starts with nameless, it ends with nameless. You have you and you have I. So again, the you and I thing is drawn together quite clearly. And do you have names or not? Are we us or not? I don't know. Endless destinations demand eternal. So that's a little linguistic quick there. E starts with E, ends with E, 2 Ds in the middle. And it just sounds nice, basically. And endless and eternal are linked quite nicely there. But again, it's that question of, does the universe always go over round and round? And the guy who drew this, he's very into this kind of mysticism stuff, but he's also a brilliant illustrator. So hopefully as well, we'll make a few more of these together. And that middle bit, bench waits for everyone, Harry can sit. It's the space of the bench that makes the bench useful. Not the bench, but the fact the bench is empty. It's like this drink, the cup is useful because it's empty, so things can go in it. So that's just talking about space. Pirate and Clown, that was obviously for the April Fish exhibition, which is fun. And that's kind of commenting on humor and how, again, this correlational thinking idea that, you know, humor is funny because it's horrendous normally. You know, like the clown's nose, which is red. It shouldn't be red, it shouldn't hurt, but that makes it funny. Clown's noses aren't that funny, but death can be hilarious. It's horrendous, but it's everything. It's so meaningless, and the death is the funniest bit in the piece, in my thing. And again, it's that absurdist thing of, well, recognizing the mundane as absurd is your way to kind of escape and to enjoy things. Kiss of the Sphinx, that's much the same as nameless. Long becomes short, small becomes big, again with the correlational thinking idea. And engulfed and ceased, that's my way of just kind of punching to make it a little bit more engaging. I love the imagery of my teeth screech across a cherry desert, if I'm allowed to be a little narcissistic. And again, that space bit, there's a punch there. Death becomes divine. Space is what is useful. Mouse and Owl, I'm not going to talk about that one too much, but there's actually a very real thing here where I think it's 2 or 3 in 10 young men die before the age of 30 if they're not in education or employment. And although I put that in there as a joke, and I think it's kind of funny about the short wingspans, short life plans, you know, it's joking to talk about that. And using humor as a way to actually put something which is true in there. And the Woodland Projects was a tough place to grow up in. Obviously, there's the projects in America, which is a whole thing. Watch The Wire if you don't know about it. It's a great show. Gaslighted Nation, class. I haven't left myself enough time to really talk about this properly, but class is a big thing that influences me. I think schools are set up in a way which are intrinsically unfair. If you're poor and you come from a rough background, you're far less likely to go to university for a whole bunch of different reasons. You know, David Cameron and Boris Johnson are both from Eton. I think there's a few more people up there. Eton's is ridiculously better than all the other schools. that's enough to show you, you know, in my mind anyway. And I don't think enough is done for that. This was a bit Buddhisty as well, because one leads to the other, and they're kind of different stories which relate to each other. And this first one particularly, that blood and pills by the fishing lakes is a photo of a cod. I mean, I wanted to write in a voice, and that's a story from a newspaper which I read when I was growing up in Suffolk, where it wasn't pills, it was actually weed, and this guy got stabbed over several ounces of weed at a fishing lake, and then he dragged himself from the fishing lake to the police station. But the thing about that is when you go to these places where there's just nothing going on in them, nothing at all, this is the kind of stuff that starts to happen. And it's always, so I don't want to say it, but it's not like crazy AK battles, it's a fishing lake. I mean, there's just nothing to do. And if there was just something there, then these things probably wouldn't happen so much. So yeah, I kind of wanted to capture that a little bit. Beerfish, I'm going to skip this one because I've basically talked about that before, but it's talking about, I wanted to play with those ideas of whether it's your identity, like the self, is more important than trying to lose the self. And I kind of talk about that a bit. Sisyphus being the self, the absurd, which is, and Buddhism, he just, I mean, Martin kills himself in his future self or past self, however you look at it. And I don't really come up with an answer. It's just a kind of a debate between what's better. So, rough velvet. I made this on twine. That took ages. It's a lot of fun writing an interactive fiction story, though. I have 2 workshops coming up. Very exciting. You should buy tickets. One is on the 21st and one is on the 28th. And I'll teach you how to write. And thank you, Round Lemon. Look, there's my little symbol there and a heart and the round lemon symbol, which is just beautiful, really. So thank you, everyone, for bearing with me. And yeah, I hope that explains what I do a little bit.
Brilliant. Thank you, Alex. It's really interesting to listen to your talk and to learn a bit more about your work. Before I go into the chat, because there's a few questions, I just wanted to ask just one. There seems to be a lot of circles and talking about the never ending, especially in your research, opposed to a sense of completion. I want to know, how do you know a piece of writing is finished?
Oh, a piece of, that's interesting. Yeah. You know, I would argue, I mean, this might sound a bit mental, but I think it's intuition. You look at something and you're like, no, this is done now. And you could maybe try to make it bigger or whatever, but this is not quite the right answer. But a friend of mine who's an artist in London told me, not every piece has to be your best piece. It needs to be a piece that works and functions, and that's fine. And most people think it's better than you think anyway, hopefully. And although that's not quite the answer I want to give, I think there's some truth to that, and letting myself not getting anxious about that. But I tend to just know that I will read through it a lot of times, and when I think it reads well, most importantly, the last thing is not overusing words. You don't really want to use the same word twice. Sometimes you have to. But, you know, if you've managed to make it so you don't repeat words, it punches well, and you think the whole thing is engaging, or at least you think, then that's a point to stop. But a good question. Perhaps there is never an end.
No, I think it's quite interesting. Even as a painter myself, trying to find an ending, sometimes it's best just to end it and move on to something else in a way and continue that cycle.
Perhaps that's the cycle.
That is the cycle. There is no end. You just make more. I'm just going to nip into the chat bar. Let's see what we've got. So from Bogdan, we've got, do you practice any form of meditation? Do you see your writing as a method of meditative therapeutic process?
That's interesting. I mean, I've always written. I've written since I was really, really young. And I didn't really have a reason to. I just liked doing it. And in primary school, people were like, oh, Alex likes writing. You should keep him writing things. So I see writing as more intuitive. I do meditate, but I haven't I've meditated every day for about a year now, but that was more to do with COVID-19 and a few things that happened during COVID-19. I'm sure everybody had a bit of crazy things that I was basically told to, and they were like, you should do this. I wrote a dissertation on meditation, which is a great sentence, at Glasgow. And so I studied it a lot, and my feeling about it was there might not be a huge difference between meditating for 10 minutes to having a bath for 30 minutes, because, to briefly say, because of neuroplasticity, the brain is always changing and adapting to every situation. So if you're relaxing and having a bath, I thought, well, scientifically, there's not much to say that there's a difference between that and the meditation. But having done meditation, I'd say I was completely wrong, and that it's a hugely helpful thing, especially in the secular world, because it takes a long time, but you just become more aware of the cycles of your thoughts. And now, having done it for a year, I'll walk along a road and I'll thinking, and it will be automatic. I don't even need to do it. And, I don't say that it hasn't necessarily made me happier than everybody else. You don't necessarily have to meditate, but I think it has made me much happier and more aware of myself. Sorry, last bit. I wouldn't say writing's a form of meditation, though. I would say the practice of meditation is very different to a process of trying to relax. Although you can use meditation to relax, but the purpose is different, I think.
Yeah. I just, as a follow-up from that, I completely lost my train of thought.
That's all right.
Tell you what, let's go for another question, and I will.
No worries.
Remember. Another one from Bogdan is, are you religious? Do you have any sort of religious beliefs?
Religious is a hard word, because my dissertation supervisor was basically writing to say why religion isn't a word. Do I have religious beliefs? No, but yes. I mean, I have beliefs about the nature of reality. Do I think that there's an afterlife? No. Though I wouldn't be closed to the idea of it either. I mean, this is a big thing with, let's take a different question. Are science and religion opposed? I mean, science is a bunch of methodologies to test things empirically. You can't say that that's false. It's obviously completely true. But to be able to speculate on the other things around us, I don't think there's any reason. I don't think science muscles into that. If anything, it just depends how you view the world. But I wouldn't say that I believe in a creator God, or that there is a reason or a rhyme to things. I believe there is just this. But whether there is more is an impossible question to ask. But I would say that I'm open to it. I wouldn't say that I've decided on anything.
Brilliant. I've also remembered my question. It's also quite a deep one and quite a sort of metaphorical question, but is knowing and knowledge happiness, would you say?
Knowing how to be happy could be happiness, but trying to be happy is unhappiness, I think, which is that correlational thinking again, perhaps. I mean, knowing, no, I mean, a big takeaway, though, I think that I would take from some of these things is actually just being in the moment and being yourself and being an animal, essentially, is probably how happy that you would be. Though, and this goes to the absurdism, because we've created a society where we're not able to be like that, which is a good thing in a lot of ways, because it means we all have an ability to try to live in the world for hopefully a long period of time, to try to do things that we want to do. But at the same time, it stops us from being naturally ourselves and naturally creatures. And this is where the contention is drawn between, we kind of have to be unhappy to exist in the modern world. I would say that knowing can be a route to happiness, depending what you do with the knowing.
Brilliant. Sorry, I know that question was probably a spanner in the works. Just jumping straight onto Camilla, there's two here. There's A, what is the piece of writing you're most excited about? And B, what's the piece of writing you've had the best feedback on?
I My favorite, my little nest egg was Green Magpies. I spent a lot of time on that. That was the one I initially sent to Round Lemon. And it was the one I wanted to kind of do. I don't know. There's something about it where I think it captured myself a lot in that piece, a lot of my views about stuff, and kind of passively as well, with the absurdity and a lot of just random things that, you know, I'm a very much a what's going to happen next, let's find out kind of person. And I kind of feel like I captured that in the main character. Feedback, I mean, I'm not really sure, because although I've put in a lot of writing out there, I haven't actually necessarily shown it to a lot of people, and people haven't necessarily come back to me. I mean, I hang around with a lot of artists in London because I'm super, super cool, but I don't show them my work. I tell them I'm a writer, and it's a lot easier for me to see their work because I can look at it for a second and be like, oh, that looks nice, doesn't it? But to get someone to sit down and read a short story you wrote is a bit more of an effort. I've had more feedback from my job, from the books, the writing that I do for my job, and they really like my writing, and they tell me that I've been told that I'm the best, actually, which is pretty good by the managers. So that's a little feather on my cap. But that's it's different because you're writing to demand, and I'm really happy to have that job. But I don't get. I mean, it's liberated me so much with how I live. But the piece I'm most excited about, I'm writing a piece at the moment which is only called Wood Murder. It's going to be called something else, but I'm trying to write something. The difficult thing is when you send off stuff to other submission places where like George R.R. Martin sent his original thing of Game of Thrones to, you're not allowed to send them to anywhere else. And if they get published online anywhere, they won't take it. So I'm excited about that because I think it will be good, and I'm taking a lot of time over it. At the same time, I can't do anything with it. I have to send it to them and then wait for 3 to 6 months to see if they'll do anything with it, which is really irritating because, you know, but it is what it is. But overall, one thing I have been excited about is via Round Lemon, I've been able to have all my stuff published somewhere, and it gives it that little extra bit of validity. So when you like my stuff and put it up there, I can be like, this has been published by this person, instead of saying I wrote this and it's on my website. And it gives it that little bit more of a thing, you know. So that's been exciting for me.
We absolutely love your writing at Round Lemon as well, Alex.
Thank you.
Green Magpies is one of my favorite pieces that we have on Zest at the moment. I think with that, I think it's time to wrap it up.
Yes.
I'm absolutely in love with the Coffee and Alex and the Round Lemon logos. So actually, really quickly, what dates again were your workshops?
Here we go, 21st and 28th.
Yes, and you can buy them through the Zest shop at roundlemon.co.uk.
Yes, you can.
So thank you everybody for joining. We have free artist talk every Thursday from 7 p.m. Tickets are free and can be bought at the Round Lemon shop, zestshop.com. No, roundlemon.co.uk/zestshop. Alex links and contact information is all in the description below. If you are able, please donate £3 at roundlemon.co.uk/donate. And thank you very much.